Welcome to the Wiscard of Oz, Adventures in School Psychology. I'm Marcus,
And I'm Sophia.
and today we're going to do an interesting little intro segment. So, with our guest today, we're going to be talking about dyslexia. So, I thought an interesting thing we could do, since it's such a popular topic to talk about, is look at some clips in the media, in different TV shows and movies, and see how dyslexia is depicted and just review that stuff and give our thoughts on it. And we'll wait to hear the official thoughts on dyslexia from our guest, Dr. Story, but we'll give our preliminary thoughts as we watch these. So, the first one is from the infamous Disney Channel commercial with Bella Thorne. Disney Channel did a series of commercials called TTIs, the Time Eyes, and they talked about like different experiences that different kids had. So this one is about Bella Thorne and how she has dyslexia. I encourage you to watch these clips on YouTube. I have the links in the episode description, but in order to avoid copyright infringement, I've decided not to include them. So I'm going to explain what is happening in the clips just in case you can't watch the clips. So in this first clip, Bella Thorne talks about her experiences struggling with dyslexia. She says that she could not read as well as her classmates could starting in first grade. She says that her brain mixes up letters such as D and B and M and W. The commercial shows a visual of M's and W's and B's and D's switching with each other. She also mentions that dyslexia is different for everyone, but for her it makes it harder to read and write. She then goes on to explain that her family helped her practice reading on a daily basis with everyday things like cereal boxes. She says that dyslexia taught her to face problems instead of running away from them, and she also says that dyslexia only makes tasks harder for her, but not impossible. All right, so there's our first one. What are your initial thoughts, Sophia?
So the first time that I ever watched that, I was probably, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something. And I remember thinking it was like ridiculous because the TTIs were usually like, this is the time I went to California or I did this or whatever. And it seemed so strange because I was like, why are we learning? Why are we talking
Mm-hmm.
about reading? I'm trying to
Yeah.
watch Shake It Up. And so I feel like it's been something that the people around me like had joked about for so long, like even into high school, like people would be
Mm-hmm.
like, haha, my TTI, like remember that?
Mm-hmm.
But like then it got less funny because I had friends with dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
So it became less of like a haha and more of a like, no, like this is real. And
Mm-hmm.
so in that way, I think it gets misused in a way. I don't know if that's the right word, but people use it more as like a joking point rather than realizing that it is like a relatively straight up idea of what dyslexia is. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
probably the easiest way you could describe it to kids,
Mm-hmm.
or anyone that doesn't understand. So it really would be informative to watch for
Yeah.
kids that were whatever, 10, 11, 12,
Mm-hmm.
but it got misconstrued and turned into something not as informative.
Yeah. And one thing I noticed in the actual commercial, uh, kind of a picky point, but the whole like mixing up the letters visually, I've always seen as a myth, and we'll hear from Dr. Story to see if there's any truth to that. But I
Mm.
don't think anything that Bella Thorne said was playing into that myth, but the way they showed it on the screen when Bella Thorne was like, I mix up letters like B and D and M and W, and then they like showed the
Mhm.
letters like flipping and mixing, that might have been misleading. But I did like how they showed that it's kind of a challenge that can be overcome. It just takes more work, as she put it, and it's something that you can overcome. And she said at the end that she reads a year above her grade level now. So I think that's an inspiring message, especially to kids who have dyslexia.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, we'll speak about it more with Dr. Story about whether dyslexia should be seen as a superpower or something that's, like a negative thing. And I think she does a good job of not making it either necessarily and
Mm-hmm.
just making it a reality and saying this is something I have to deal with. And it's something that I was able to get over and work with and learn strategies to keep reading and
Yeah.
do better than I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So overall, I think this was a pretty good depiction of dyslexia. Pretty good message to kids. We should give it a number rating. What do you think? Out of 10?
Hmm. Yeah, out of 10. I think I'd give it like a Maybe a 7.
That's what I was thinking. Solid 7.
Yeah.
All right, so next, so that actress Bella Thorne was in a Disney Channel show called Shake It Up, and in the show, her character Cece has dyslexia, just like she does in real life. So we're next going to watch the clip where that is revealed in the show. In this clip, a girl named Cece is seen crying on a stoop, and her friend Rocky comes out to ask Cece why she has not told her that she has dyslexia. Cece says that she was embarrassed about having dyslexia, but Rocky says that she should not be embarrassed by this. Cece responds that she sometimes sees letters as alphabet soup and that she is often scared to read out loud. Cece also explains that she never wanted anyone to know about it because people may be judgmental about disorders. Cece then talks about how dyslexia impacts her dancing and makes her feel less than other dancers because she gets her left and right confused. Rocky says that she now sees Cece as twice as tough as she previously thought and that everyone has to carry around baggage. Cece's baggage is dyslexia. All right, initial thoughts?
Um, I don't know. That one doesn't feel as informative, I think, as the last one was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it might be good representation wise for,
Mm-hmm.
kids or even adults that have dyslexia and have a hard time with it to see that, it's not always going to be fun and games and it's not going to be easy. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be hard sometimes and it's going to really suck, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it did a good job of showing how that experience can feel like sometimes for people who have dyslexia, like the embarrassment that could come with it.
Hmm.
Um, but the other character, Rocky, was kind of, it seemed like the voice of reason, kind of like trying to say, like, millions of people have it. It's not something you have to be embarrassed about, things like that.
Hmm.
So I think it was pretty good. There was that one thing where she said that it looks like alphabet soup, which I thought at first might have been playing into that possible misconception, but I think also it was just showing how like it's hard for people with dyslexia to decode words and it takes a long time
Hmm.
to go through it. So kind of just looking at the page looks like it's just a bunch of letters without like immediately seeing all the words that are there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it necessarily played into that, like flipping of the B's and D's or anything like that.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that it probably helped them having someone who actually had dyslexia be part of the production of that so that there weren't any confusion about what it actually looks like.
I wonder if she helped them to write that scene or maybe even that episode. Just like I would hope so. I mean, to at least get her input of what she's actually experiencing instead of trying to force some sort of stereotype about dyslexia onto this girl with dyslexia that might not even apply to her.
Yeah. And also, a point that I forgot, if any of you don't know the show, it's about they're two dancers on a dancing show. So that's
Hmm.
why she was talking about how it affects her dancing. All right. So what would you give that one?
Um, Maybe like a 6, five and a
Hmm.
half.
Yeah.
Not super informative, but definitely shows like the reality.
Yeah. I was thinking a 6 too. All right. Next, we're going to watch is from a movie. It's from the Percy Jackson movie. In this clip, a boy named Percy Jackson is sitting in class. A teacher writes a quote on the board from Othello. She calls on Percy to tell her what Shakespeare meant by the quote. When Percy tries to read the quote, we see the letters start moving around and some Greek letters also start to appear. He responds that he doesn't know the answer. All right, so in the books, it's been a while since I read them, but it's about demigods who have one parent who's a Greek god and one parent who's not. And they all have this, their brains are hardwired to read ancient Greek. So it's explained as like the letters flip around. That's like how their brains are wired so that they can read that. But it makes it so that they have dyslexia, so they can't read English words because all the letters are like mixing around because that's how their brains are hardwired. What are your thoughts, Sophia?
As soon as it came up, I like remembered watching it way back when, because at first I wasn't sure, but yeah, I remember that. I don't love it because I think it's a really poor portrayal of what dyslexia is like, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
even explicitly say it necessarily in that scene, so it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's just kind of like nonsense. Like I
Yeah,
really didn't like it. And they were even throwing it was different than just word salad or whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
There was Greek letters in there and it was
hmm
just all confused. And that's not what it's really like.
yeah,
Maybe if you're a demigod or whatever,
yeah,
but that's not what it's
yeah,
going to be like for any other kid with dyslexia. You're
yeah,
not going to see Greek letters.
yeah. I think it's odd that they called it dyslexia. Like they could have just said that their brains are hardwired for ancient Greek and left it at that. But the fact
Hmm.
that they called it dyslexia is a little odd,
Yeah,
making
not a
people
fan
think
of
that,
that.
yeah, making it's just like pushing misconceptions about what it actually is. So that one I'm going
Yeah.
to give a, I don't know, a two.
Yeah, I'd give it a two, maybe a three for like, I don't know.
Entertainment value.
Yeah, entertainment. The X Factor or whatever they call it.
All right. So the next clip that we're going to watch is from The Cosby Show from the 80s and 90s. Not seen that much anymore for obvious reasons, but I wanted to show this clip from it. In this clip, a man named Theo is sitting with his parents and talking to a counselor. She tells him that his notes are disorganized and that he has many structural and mechanical errors in his writing. She suggests that he get assessed for dyslexia. Theo's mother says that dyslexia is a disorder in which people see letters backwards or in the wrong order. The counselor responds that that is only one form of it and that dyslexia is just a different type of thinking. She says that Theo has the brain power, but he has a glitch in the way he takes in information and processes language. The counselor says that Theo can be helped with the right program. She then asks him if he has trouble finding the right words when he is called on in class, which he says that he does. The counselor says that they need to do further testing, but Theo's father is eager to have Theo diagnosed with dyslexia so that he can get the right help. In the next scene, Theo tells his parents that he has dyslexia, and they all celebrate. All right. So I liked how that one gave a more like in-depth uh, description of what some of the struggles associated with dyslexia could be, and I also liked how the person evaluating Theo said that she would have to give like a comprehensive evaluation,
Hmm.
which is a good look into that. That it's not like an easy thing to just say you have it, and they were kind of like showing that if you have dyslexia, there's things that can be done to make you more successful. And I also like that they were saying that it's just like a deficit in how you process language, and it's not something that's associated with like how intelligent you are or anything like that.
Yeah, I definitely like that she was looking for a comprehensive look rather than just being so quick to be like, you have dyslexia. It was just a thought, even though his dad was jumping to conclusions basically. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's some context there that maybe, I don't know, maybe is, I don't know, generally poor grades or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that she mentioned that there was issues with like in her own words, but encoding and decoding
Mm-hmm.
because that's such a big part of it. It feels like the rest of the clips didn't really touch that. They focused more so on just the physical look of the letters and of the words.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was a really good one.
Yeah. And for context, because I forgot to give it, Theo struggled throughout high school and college with academics a lot. So for the parents, at least, and for him, it was like an answer, like finally, like something that they
Hmm.
can point to and work on and help him improve on his grades finally. But yeah, I thought this was a good clip. I'm gonna give it a nine.
Yeah, I would probably put it at about the same.
Yeah, and we'll see further in our conversation with Dr. Story if those things that the evaluator or whoever she was, I assume she was an evaluator or
Hmm.
maybe like a counselor. We can see if those things line up with what Dr. Story describes dyslexia as. And those are all our clips. So I think it was a broad range of showing the misconceptions that surround dyslexia to showing a more accurate, nuanced view of the struggles that can come with it.
Hmm.
So now we're going to move on to our guests and have a great discussion with Dr. Story. So our guest today, who we'll be talking to about dyslexia, is Dr. Michelle Story. Dr. Michelle Story is an assistant professor and the coordinator of the school psychology program at SUNY Oswego. In addition to this, she is a licensed psychologist in private practice, and she specializes in dyslexia assessment. Dr. Story is also the director of the Syracuse University Psychoeducational Teaching Laboratory, a position she has held since 2000. She was born in Yorktown Heights, New York. Throughout her childhood, her family moved between several different states, including Maryland, Indiana, Ohio, Massachusetts, and California. Dr. Story attended the University of Rochester for undergrad, where she majored in psychology. She then attended Syracuse University for graduate school. During her school psychology internship, Dr. Story was hired by the Syracuse City School District. Dr. Story received her PhD in May 2001. While she was in grad school, Dr. Story met her husband, whom she married in August 2001. Dr. Story has one son who was born in February 2006. Dr. Story worked as a school psychologist for 18 years before starting at SUNY Oswego 4 years ago. She now lives in Cicero, New York. In her free time, Dr. Story enjoys Zumba, spending time with her friends, and traveling. When asked about her biggest strength, Dr. Story told us that she enjoys working with others in various capacities, including collaborating on projects or research, teaching, and working with students. Dr. Story also mentioned that she is hardworking and has had multiple job positions since she was 14. Dr. Story has been described as hardworking, energetic, and caring. So I am very excited to hear Dr. Story's thoughts on dyslexia, hoping we can learn a lot from it. Hello, Dr. Story. It's great to have you here on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. We're just going to have you introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns, and then we can get started.
Hi, everybody. My name's Michelle Story, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers.
Okay, so our first question, just to kind of lay the scene out, is what area you're most passionate about within school psychology?
There are actually two big areas that I'm very passionate about within school psychology, and that's somewhat reflected in the courses that I teach. I'm very passionate about assessment, and I'm very passionate about intervention. So for me, I really find it fascinating to be able to give measures that are going to highlight a student's strengths and weaknesses so that we can really get to the root of what students can do and what areas they may have greater difficulty in. And so I enjoy teaching courses related to academic assessment, cognitive assessment, and social emotional assessment, because I really feel that it helps you to hone in on a student's strengths and weaknesses. But related to that, because I think assessment is the first part where we find out what the strengths and weaknesses are, I really enjoy and am passionate about the intervention part. Once we know what a student's profile is, what do you then do to address the areas of weakness? And so I teach courses on social emotional intervention, and I have taught academic intervention for many years too, because to me, being able to then address those areas of weakness is really important.
All right, and then next we just want to know what area you are most passionate about outside of school psychology, so just anything else.
So outside of school psychology, I just think that school psychology is an amazing field, but at the same time, it carries with it a lot of work, a lot of stress at times. So I think it's really important to have activities that you enjoy doing outside of the school setting that can give you some mental well-being. I am a Zumba instructor. I've been a Zumba instructor for, I think it's going on 13 and a half years now. And so I teach Zumba courses at a local gym. And then I also do Zumba teaching vacations where I teach at resorts in Caribbean destinations in exchange for a free all-inclusive stay. So it's really a nice way to rewind and get some balance with some of the challenges of our fast-paced job and working in a school.
That sounds like some great self-care, really. Getting a whole vacation out of it. That's nice.
Yeah.
And then our last question for the intro is, when you're thinking about the future of our school's school psychology program, what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about some of the new things that are happening in our program, particularly this is a perfect example of it. I love the fact that Sophia, you and Marcus are doing this podcast and really showcasing for others what school psychology is and what it's like to be a school psychology graduate student, because it's not necessarily for everybody, but for folks to be able to learn about the field and to learn about graduate school in school psychology before ever entering, I think is really exciting. I'm also excited about the fellowship that the university was lucky enough to receive, because I think it's providing opportunities for individuals who may not have envisioned themselves as school psychologists previously, or it's allowing us to reduce barriers so that anybody could get a graduate education, which is really exciting. And I think it's sparked a lot of interest in the field of school psychology. We had our highest applicant pool in over 10 years this past year, which was very exciting. And so I'm excited about where we're headed. And we have some exciting new pieces coming up within the program. We're looking to revamp our website. We are starting a formal mentorship program, and we're going to have activities built into that. And so I'm really excited about what we've accomplished this past year and where the program's headed.
It's a really exciting time to be in the program too, because with the fellowship and everything that's come with it, like the mentorship program that you mentioned, it feels like we can really make a difference in the program and in the field through this program, and we can really influence what the future of school psychologists look like in our area. So it's really exciting for us as well.
I certainly hope so. Each week, I'm getting many calls from superintendents and directors of special education, just letting me know that there are these openings that they haven't been able to fill. And we know that there's a nationwide school psychologist shortage, but that really has impacted the central New York area. And I love the thought of being able to grow our program so that we can really provide well-rounded, strong school psychologists to these local districts.
Definitely. It's that shortage is one of the most pressing problems that we think about, even though it's good for us because we can get a job. We also want to increase the amount of school psychologists that are being put into the field so that schools aren't in trouble when they're trying to get kids the help that they need.
Absolutely.
All right, so now we're going to get into the topic of this episode, which is dyslexia. Dyslexia is such a hot topic. It's something that a lot of people talk about. It's talked about a lot in the media, and it's a word that's thrown around a lot, but it also feels like there's a lot of misconceptions around it. And even though everyone knows the word and thinks they know what it means, it's not really widely understood in the sense that it should be on a professional level. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk to you about your thoughts about dyslexia and to dispel some of those myths that surround it. So for starters, we've learned that there's a few different definitions that exist for dyslexia, and there's a little debate in the air about what the definition that's most useful is. So in your experience, what definition do you think is the most useful when talking about dyslexia?
So I use the International Dyslexia Association's definition of dyslexia. I think while there is a lack of consensus on the definition, I think this is the definition that's most widely accepted. And it specifically states that dyslexia is a type of specific learning disability and specifies that it's neurobiological. And it talks specifically about some of the difficulties that students may experience could be difficulty with accurate and or fluent word recognition and with weaker spelling or decoding abilities. So what's nice about that definition, I think most folks know that dyslexia would be difficulty with decoding, but it also talks about the importance of encoding or spelling, as well as the fluency piece, because if a student is also having trouble effectively pulling the words off the page and it takes them a really long time to read, that's going to ultimately impact their comprehension and what they're able to retain from the passages they're trying to read. Now, with the IDEA definition, it talks about how these difficulties result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. So it's a language-based learning disability. And I know there's a lot of confusion out there related to this being a visual learning disability, and the research really does not support that. The deficit is in phonological processing abilities. And another component of the IDEA definition is that dyslexia is unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities. So this would mean that, for example, the student's bright, this isn't due to an intellectual disability, but also that the student has received effective classroom instruction. So they have received interventions and or instruction that's targeted to their specific needs. And then also with this definition, it talks about how there can be some secondary consequences that can result as a result of dyslexia, and that can include weaknesses with reading comprehension. And then what happens is when reading is more challenging for individuals, then they're less likely to read, and that can lead to less exposure to reading texts, which means weaknesses potentially in vocabulary and background knowledge.
And when you think about that definition, you mentioned some of it already, but when you see a student that has dyslexia, what does it typically look like in layman's terms?
So labored reading, that the reading isn't happening fluently. It's not happening with ease. So it might be that a student is halting at words as they're trying to sound out the words. It might be that the student is able to unlock the words. They're able to decode the words on the page, but it takes them a long time to do so. And ultimately, we all have so much cognitive energy or working memory. So if we're spending all of that cognitive energy or working memory trying to sound out those words, there's little left over for comprehension and making sense of what it is that we've read. Students may also guess at words based on the initial letters or phonemes in the words. So they might name another word that, if the word is boy, they might say bay because they're guessing, they're looking at initial and final phonemes in the word. Oftentimes they may struggle with the medial sounds in the word. Students may skip articles, so words like a and the, which hold less meaning, doesn't always interfere with the meaning, but oftentimes they can skip words when they're reading as well.
Great, thank you.
So one of the things that Marcus and we've been learning a lot about this year and we've been focusing on are the 13 classifications. And so when looking at those, dyslexia is not in there. We have learning disabilities and reading. So do you think, because it's not in the 13 classifications, that school psychologists should be diagnosing dyslexia?
Actually, it is in the federal and state definition of a learning disability. So IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as New York State's Part 200 regulations, defines a specific learning disability as a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that manifests itself in an imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do math. And it specifically states that this category includes such conditions as, and it lists a number of them: perceptual disabilities, brain injury, and dyslexia is listed as one of the types of learning disabilities. So that's actually in both our federal definition and our state definition.
So
Okay.
do you think that when you're classifying a student, that school psychologists should be looking at dyslexia as a diagnosis, or that they should just be doing a specific learning disability?
Well, first you need to see what area it's impacting. So certainly in this particular case, we're talking about reading disabilities. So yes, this is a type of learning disability in reading. That doesn't mean if a student has a learning disability in reading, they automatically have dyslexia. Again, it's one type of learning disability in reading. But I can't speak to all of the states, but in New York State, there was guidance documents issued from our state education department back in 2018, stipulating that school districts should be using the terms, that they can utilize the terms and they should be utilizing the terms, including dyslexia.
Great. I know there's some controversy out there about whether school psychologists should be using that term and what's involved with that. So it's good to hear your opinion on that.
I think the controversy stems from school districts being worried about liability, because I think they're worried that if they utilize the term dyslexia or dyscalculia or dysgraphia, that then they're going to need to implement an evidence-based program or, intervention model that will address the particular area of deficit. But what's interesting is the research really shows that what works for students with dyslexia works for all weaker readers, that can really benefit all students. So even though school districts might be nervous about utilizing those terms, and they should certainly have the proper training so they understand what those disabilities are and they know how to assess for it, they ideally, if identified, we have the research out there that shows how to address the most challenging of reading disabilities, including dyslexia.
And what do you think about the argument that since it doesn't impact whether a student gets services or not, whether you say the term dyslexia or say the term specific learning disability, that it maybe doesn't matter and shouldn't be assessed for?
I would disagree with that. Same thing with ADHD. Just because a student may have ADHD doesn't automatically mean that a student requires an individualized education plan or IEP. I think you need to look individually at the student's learning profile and the individual strengths and weaknesses. If it rises to the level that the student requires specialized instruction, and if the student has had appropriate interventions and has shown that they've failed to respond to intervention, then the student may be eligible for special education services as a student with dyslexia falling under the umbrella of a specific learning disability. But there are some students for whom they may have received appropriate intervention and instruction. And for those students, they may have found compensatory strategies so that perhaps they are able to make meaning from what they're reading. And perhaps they are able to access accommodations through books on tape, or use word processors when writing to mitigate some of the spelling challenges that they may have. So for those students, they may not require specialized instruction, but they still need those accommodations. And so for those students, it might be more appropriate to provide a 504 accommodation plan.
Great. And then speaking of misconceptions around dyslexia, one of the most pervasive myths that I've heard, or maybe there's some truth to it, we'll see what you think, is that students with dyslexia kind of see letters floating on the page, or they see letters that are backwards. What are your thoughts on that? Is there any truth to that, or is that completely a myth?
That is a myth. I think people think that dyslexia is a visually based challenge or difficulty, and that's why students confuse the B's and D's or may read or see words backwards. In reality, dyslexia is a phonological deficit. It's a language-based learning disability. So it's associated with different impairments in brain regions that are associated with manipulating sounds, not vision. Now, if students do persist, so first of all, it's developmentally appropriate for kindergartners and first graders to, as they're learning the alphabet, to confuse their B's and their D's and their P's and their Q's. So that is something that we see quite often in those younger grade levels. If that persists, if you're still seeing it 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that potentially could be a sign that we might want to take a look more comprehensively at a student's reading. But that in of itself would not be the only piece that we would be looking at. And we would also be looking at the students' decoding, their spelling, their reading fluency, if we really wanted to take a comprehensive look at dyslexia. But it's not a visual deficit, it is a language-based learning disability.
And then when we're thinking about talking to students about dyslexia, there was an infographic that I found and shared with you both from the International Dyslexia Association about whether we should be seeing dyslexia as a deficit or as a gift. Because there is certain trains of thought. Some people think that we should be presenting dyslexia as a gift because it gives students hope that their brains just function differently, that it's not a deficit. And there is some evidence that there are some strengths associated with dyslexia in terms of brain functioning. But the other side says that we should really be focusing on interventions, and that if we're presenting this as a gift, that we're setting students up for disappointment when they don't reach those certain abilities that they think that they may have when they're compared to certain celebrities or others who have achieved great things while having dyslexia. I wanted to know your thoughts on this debate and how we should be presenting dyslexia to students.
Well, I think anytime that I am working with families or working with students, and if we're talking about a topic like dyslexia or frankly other types of learning challenges that students might face, typically I start by talking about all of us have unique strengths and weaknesses, and the way our brains work, each of us have, unique aspects in that. So my strengths may differ from Sophia's, and they may differ from yours, Marcus. So the reality is that everybody has unique learning styles and strengths and weaknesses. And I typically talk about how for students with dyslexia, one of the challenges that they often face is that they may have greater difficulty pulling the words off the page and making sense of written text, or they may have difficulty with spelling and getting their thoughts down on paper. So when we talk about that, I don't know if I'd present it as a gift per se. I mean, I think it's a challenge. And most of the students that I work with who have dyslexia, they're quite aware that they cannot read as well as their peers. And in fact, that sometimes can lead to depression and anxiety and not wanting to go to school and not enjoying reading, because they're very much aware that their peers or sometimes even their younger siblings can pick up this information far faster than they can. So I think to then say this is a gift might actually be a bit insulting and might even, make them feel pretty bad about that, because they don't feel like it's a gift. They're frustrated and they're working harder than their peers many times, despite being bright and despite having a lot of good knowledge. So the way I kind of focus on this is that, this is challenging for you, but great news. We know what works. We know how to make reading easier for you, how to make school easier for you for that matter too. So I think what ultimately we want to do with students with dyslexia, and frankly, again, students with other types of disabilities, is help them learn ways to compensate for their challenges and remediate their areas of difficulty, but also learn compensatory strategies so that it's not holding them back. And students, when they do receive the proper type of intervention, they can decode, they can figure out the code of language and can figure out how to make sense of words. Again, they may need to use accommodations, particularly when they get up to the more challenging high school and college level courses, but they can find ways so it doesn't have to hold them back. Is that a gift? I don't know if I necessarily define that as a gift, but I think it can teach a strong work ethic, and I think it teaches persistence and finding ways to work around challenges, which is something I think everybody has to face, disability or not.
Yeah, and I think that one of the touched on this a little bit. One of the important things that we should emphasize to students is to emphasize their successes and how much they've overcome. And when they talk about comparing it to celebrities and things like that, you can kind of emphasize that they have overcome these struggles and they've come out on the other side and are able to accomplish so much. So it's something that they can work through and it doesn't have to keep them down always. Is that something that you would agree with, Dr. Suri?
Absolutely. Yes.
And then our last major question for you, which we touched on a little bit throughout our conversation, is what you think are some of the most effective interventions for students with dyslexia?
So I'm glad you asked that question. Basically, the research is pretty clear in this area. It talks about the importance of providing students with explicit, systematic, evidence-based reading instruction. So what that means is that we are explicitly teaching students the patterns of language. We are not implicitly just exposing them to text and hoping that they're going to form connections between phonemes and graphemes. We are explicitly teaching students those patterns, and we're doing it in a very systematic manner where we are initially modeling this for the student, then we're doing it collaboratively with the students, and then we're giving the students independent practice. So providing explicit, systematic, evidence-based reading instruction. We also want to give lots and lots of opportunities to practice decodable text, meaning that once we've taught those patterns, we then want to give students the opportunity to practice reading those patterns in different texts and new texts so that they get lots and lots of opportunities to begin forming their sight word vocabularies. You know, for some students, they need as little as 4 exposures to words in order to effectively learn the word. For others, they need over 100. So it's going to be very important that we're providing lots of opportunities for practice decoding those different patterns that we've taught them. The third element is teaching phonemic awareness skills to proficient and advanced levels. So phonemic awareness is the ability to recognize that words can be broken down to sounds and that they can be manipulated in some way. And a lot of times what we find with our older readers, so older elementary school, middle school, high school students, is that their decoding gets to a certain point and then they're having difficulty kind of getting beyond that point. And a lot of times that can be traced back to deficits in phonemic awareness, difficulties with blending, segmenting, phoneme manipulation. And the research has really shown that the programs that had the strongest gains in working with students with reading challenges didn't just provide that explicit, systematic, phonics-based instruction, but it also taught phonemic awareness skills and taught phonemic awareness skills to proficiency and more advanced levels like phoneme manipulation. And then the final element of intervention programs that work, that's a kind of more recent piece that's been added or discovered, is the importance of plenty of opportunities to practice with spelling. So we're teaching the reading of those patterns, but we also want to be giving students plenty of opportunities to practice with spelling those patterns as well.
And so that all being said, is there anything that students can do on their own outside of school, maybe during the summer breaks, that would help them with any of those skills aside from reading?
When you say students practicing, are you talking about school psychology grad students, or are you talking about a student with dyslexia?
A student with dyslexia, like anything that maybe they could do on their own to kind of just work on these skills.
So I guess it would depend on what their strengths and weaknesses are and what age level student we're talking. So when I say explicit and systematic phonics-based instruction, oftentimes that's provided by somebody who has a vast knowledge base of reading, you know, and knows how to address a student's unique profile. So certainly students can read up on what dyslexia is. And there may be some programs online that they potentially could participate in, but many teachers, if a gen ed teacher or a reading specialist or a special ed teacher is well versed in explicit systematic phonics based instruction, they could be providing the student with the type of intervention and supports that they need. And then for the student, they should be practicing reading, but it's important that they're practicing with opportunities for feedback, because you don't want students to be practicing errors. And so typically you only get that feedback if somebody's listening to you read. That's why it's kind of hard to say, well, what can they be doing? If we're talking an elementary student, for example, you would want them to have reading opportunities with somebody who would provide immediate corrective feedback so that they're not practicing errors.
And if I could go back for a minute, you mentioned practicing spelling. So
Yes.
when I think back to my experience, there was in elementary school, there was a lot of like spelling tests that we had, things of that nature. Is that the type of practice that you think is helpful?
Well, the spelling words that are picked for tests, and I'm not saying necessarily doing spelling tests, there could be word sorts where, depending on the patterns that you've taught the students, if you've taught OI and OY, for example, students could be sorting words according to the spelling of the word so that they can start to see the patterns and which words fall into different phonetic patterns. So certainly that could carry over into a spelling test, but I think sometimes what we see are the spelling words maybe have to do with a holiday. So Valentine's Day, and the spelling words are heart, and they're red, and it's Cupid. And the spelling words don't have any necessary patterns to them other than they relate to Valentine's Day. What I'm saying is, maybe if you're still going to do spelling tests, have the words relate to the pattern that you've explicitly taught that week, and that is going to be more effective than just pulling a list of Valentine's Day words.
That's great advice. So it sounds like that fits into that explicit systematic kind of instruction where you build up on certain skills and you really focus and hone in on those skills.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I think that was a very in-depth look on what dyslexia is and what it can look like. And all the instruction that we've gotten in this conversation will definitely help us in the future as we look to help students who have dyslexia. So thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to talk to us about it.
You're welcome. Thanks for including me.
For our diversity, equity, and inclusion segment this week, I wanted to talk about privilege because as school psychologists working with a diverse population of students in the future, we'll have to look at our own privilege and look at the privilege that exists in our society and in the structures that we work within and see how that is impacting our students and how we can work around those privileges and enhance equitable practices in our schools. So I just want to do a rundown of what privilege looks like, what it is, some examples of it, and then we're going to talk about some questions having to do with privilege. So we all have a multitude of identities that we live with. So in terms of race, my identity would be white, and then we have different, like we have a gender identity, we have sexual orientation, we have a religious identity. There's all these different identities that intersect to create who we are and to create who we are in society and what privileges we have within society. So a lot of the information that I'll be talking about related to privilege comes from the National Association of School Psychologists, and you can see the resources that I used in our episode description. So if you want to learn more, if you want to see the good resources that they have, you can check them out there. So according to NASP, privilege is based on a couple different concepts. So privilege includes unearned advantages that are highly valued but restricted to certain groups. So in the US, the majority culture is white in terms of race. So white people have certain privileges, certain unearned advantages that are valued within our society, but that only white people have, and members of other minority racial groups or ethnic groups don't have. So if you think about outside of race for a second, if you think about wealth, because that's another identity. So there's certain privileges that are associated with being born into a wealthy family. So one unearned advantage could be that you have access to higher education or certain institutions of higher education that people who aren't born into wealthy families do not have as easy access to. And then, so that would lead to, maybe better jobs, higher paying jobs. So you didn't earn those advantages, but you get those advantages just because you're born to that group. Another principle associated with this is that privilege oppresses certain groups. So when you are privileged in a certain way, those people who do not have those privileges are oppressed in some way. So to use another example, if you look at male privilege, there are certain advantages that men get, such as, for example, maybe if you're in a meeting at work, the opinions of men may be valued or respected more than the opinions of women just by the leadership at that job. So the women in that situation or the people of other gender identities would be oppressed in that situation because they're not having their opinions equally valued, even though their opinions are likely just as valuable as those of the men in the group. And then another principle is that when control has been given to one group, that group can earn privileges that have not been afforded to other groups. So, like in the higher education example I gave, those people who were able to access better institutions of higher education get positions of leadership that other groups don't have, and then they set the rules for what those organizations will run by. So since that group got the control, they can then institute a series of other privileges, like how the culture of the office runs or the pay scale, things like that, that other groups don't get those privileges. So an important point to note about privilege is that it is invisible to the members of the majority culture. So as a white person, there are many privileges that I receive that I don't see. If I don't want to see them, I don't have to. So it doesn't seem like just from me living my life that I have privileges, but when you really look into it, there are privileges that exist. So just to use an education example, maybe in high school, I could have been seeing a lot of times in schools, white students are seen as more capable than students of minority groups in academic areas. So maybe I was recommended to an advanced placement class over other students from minority groups because of my race, and that's a privilege that I had that I didn't see. And another point is that privilege does not determine an outcome, but it can make it much harder to achieve a certain outcome. So this does not mean that people who are not white or people who are not male or any of those other identities cannot be successful. It just means that it's harder for them to get to that point of success. So in that example I just gave, let's say I got recommended to the advanced placement class and a member of a minority racial group did not. I have all these college credits that I'm accruing, and that makes it easier for me to get into the college that I want, as opposed to a student who did not get recommended to those advanced placement classes, even if they were just as capable as me at the time. And it also makes me more prepared for college, which makes it less likely that I would drop out of college. It gives me a boost in how many credits I have going into college, so I don't have to pay as much because maybe I have a whole year of credits that another student didn't have because they didn't get recommended back when it was available to them. So it just makes it harder to achieve that outcome. They can still graduate college, obviously, they can still get there, but it's just much harder than it would be for me in that area. So there's different types of privilege. There's racial privilege, there's privileges associated with gender identity, disability status, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. So just to give some examples of that, in our society, in this country, white people are often assumed to not be criminals until they prove that they are. And then maybe Black or Latino people or people of other racial groups are assumed to be criminals until they prove that they are not. And that's especially important in interactions with law enforcement, where white people may feel safe and they may feel that they are not going to be assumed that they did anything because they didn't. Whereas a Black person or Latino person may feel like they're going to be arrested or suspected of doing something just because of how they look. And that might lead to more dangerous interactions with law enforcement, as we have seen a lot in this country. When looking at gender identity, to move away from just the binary of men versus women, if you are cisgender as opposed to transgender, that may lead to some privileges in how you're viewed in hiring practices. You may be more likely to be hired if you're cisgendered. In public accommodations for bathrooms, it might be more easier for you to use the bathroom of your preferred gender identity because you're cisgendered. And if we look at disability status, that is a similar one as one I just talked about. You just being able to use all public accommodations, even though the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 mandates that all public places and all public accommodations are accessible to people with disabilities. That's not always a reality. So just the fact that you're able to go out, if you're non-disabled, you're able to go out and trust that you can always find a bathroom to use. You can always access every building. That is a privilege because you're able to access those resources that people with disabilities may not be able to. And then socioeconomic status, that's a really important privilege, especially in education. For example, if you are in a high socioeconomic status, you may have parents that are around at night to help you with your homework, to guide you, make sure you finish your homework, make sure you don't stumble on any problems or barriers that you have. Whereas if you are in a lower socioeconomic class, then your parents may have to work at night and you don't have those parents around to help guide you and to help make sure that you complete your homework and that you understand the concepts. So I also wanted to, since we're going into school psychology and we'll be working in a school, I wanted to go over some examples that may be seen in a school. So we talked about in another episode, disproportionate disciplinary practices. So students that are members of racial or ethnic minority groups are more likely to receive harsher discipline, as we talked about. And it's been shown that quick decisions lead to increased likelihood of African American or Black and Latino students receiving harsher discipline. So those implicit biases that we have can lead to members of racial or ethnic minority groups receiving more discipline than white students. So that's a type of privilege for white students because they don't miss out on as much school. They don't receive those punishments that other students would overall. And then there's certain socioeconomic advantages. If your parents are from a more wealthier background and that they have gone to higher education and graduated from college, they may be able to help you with your homework because of their education level. They may be available to help you with your homework because of when they work. If you are in a wealthier family, you don't have as much stress as students in lower income families, whether it's stress dealing with money, because students are often feeling that stress that their parents have about money, stress associated with violence in the neighborhood, food insecurity, all of those sources of chronic stress that can mess with your education whether it's sleep deprivation or just not being able to focus on your education. It's definitely hampers your ability to learn. And then parents who are wealthier may be able to get their kids more educationally enriching materials. They may read to them more, be able to buy more books for them, buy more things that will help them learn before they even enter school. So those students from wealthier backgrounds go into school with that advantage, those privileges that other students wouldn't have going in. And it just sets them up for different tracks in terms of their education, because it's so much easier for those wealthier students to grasp the material that they're learning. And then there may be privilege associated with the curriculum in schools. So white students are more likely to see positive role models in what they're learning, like thinking about inventors or leaders from the past. A lot of those white male inventors are prioritized, whereas there's, for example, a lot of Black inventors that may not be prioritized, and that's just one example. And then other races may be portrayed in stereotypical lights, and their achievements may be ignored or oversimplified. One example that NASP gave was that a lot of schools teach that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s biggest accomplishment was his I Have a Dream speech, whereas he had a lot of accomplishments in doing work that led to the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act and working for fair wages and things like that that are kind of glossed over. And those may need to be prioritized more when teaching students, because students that aren't white may need to see how they can have role models that achieve great things. And it's just a shame that they're oversimplified like that or ignored completely. So NASP has a few suggestions on how to be more culturally competent and how to not overcome, but make up for some of those privileges and try to even the playing field a little. So the first one is to assess one's own culture. So be aware of what your culture is and the privileges that are associated with that, which can help when you interact with other students and realizing what privileges you have that they don't. Another one is valuing diversity. So looking at the diverse population that you work with and learning about their culture and learning about the things that they may deal with in their lives, and valuing that diverse perspectives can lead to a stronger environment and more goals being achieved. And then the next one is manage the dynamics of difference. So learning ways to handle conflicts that emerge as a result of differing identities, differing cultures that might clash, and just learning how to deal with those conflicts and leading to a stronger outcome. Another one is adapting to diversity. So implementing equitable practices in classrooms, in instruction. So for example, if there's students in your classroom that English is not their first language and they're still learning English, maybe a way to make instruction more equitable is to not lean so heavily on the language aspect for some topics and making it more accessible to those students. So maybe after giving the lesson, those students may need more support in learning that material, maybe in their native language or with more visual examples to help them get to that level that the other students can get to naturally, just as a possible example. And then another one is institutionalizing cultural knowledge. So taking those equitable practices and baking them into school policies so that the school policies are fair to all students and are leading to the success of all students. So that's a very quick overview of what privilege is and what it can look like in schools. So I wanted to there's a quick little privilege inventory that we're gonna answer here, and you can feel free to answer along with us. And it's out of 12 items, and it just gives a little like index of how much privilege you have. And there's many different examples that you can use for this. There's one where like you take 2 steps forward for every example of privilege that you have. There's so many different types of privilege that this is just one example, but let's go through it. So number one is when I go to the store, people believe that I am trustworthy and I will not steal something. People in the store do not follow me around. So the options are yes and no. So for me, that would be yes.
That would also be yes for myself.
Yeah. So we both get 1 point. 2, as a boy, I can play with dolls, or as a girl, I can play with trucks without anyone questioning my choice. What do you think, Sophia?
For myself, yes.
Mhm. Yeah, probably yes for me. I don't know if as a kid, that's an odd one because I feel like people would question my choice if, like, as a kid, I decided to play with dolls. But I think it overall, it's a yes. So that's your thoughts, Sophia?
I think that one's a little tricky because
Mm-hmm.
it's changed a lot since you
Mm-hmm.
and I were not saying you can't play with toys now. I don't know what you
Yeah.
do with your with your free time, but um, a lot has changed since we were the age to be doing these things. So now maybe I would have a different experience or you would have a different experience
Mm-hmm.
than we did back then.
Yeah.
But the way I grew up, my parents and the people around me never had an issue with what I was doing as long as I was safe.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Yeah.
think it's a little different even for boys. I
Yeah.
think they get a lot more hassle from adults when they want to play with things that are seen as more feminine.
That's true.
So I'd like to see what most people's answers are to that one.
Yeah. I felt like when I was a kid, I would not have been comfortable playing with dolls. So maybe I'll put a no for that. All right. So for 3, I can walk after dark in public places without fear. I am not taught to fear walking alone after dark in most public places. It depends on the place, but I think I'll put a yes for that.
I would absolutely put a no.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think that's a big difference between male and female gender identities.
Yeah.
And
And even to pull it from the binary, a lot of people that identify as maybe even trans or non-binary, they also, a lot of them, I would assume, have the same fear because
yes.
there's just such a high level of violence towards trans people.
Yeah, true. All right. 4, when I'm taught about American history or about contributions made, I am sure that I will see and hear stories about people who look like me. That's a yes.
Yes.
5, the majority of the staff at my school look like me. When I think back to high school and elementary school, that's a yes, at least in terms of race.
Yeah, myself as well.
Mhm. 6, my school has plenty of books in the library, computers for students, and additional resources for students and teachers. That's a yes.
Hmm.
7, I will not be teased because of my last name. That's a yes.
For myself, that depends. I used to get teased a lot because it's just hard to pronounce, but
Hmm.
it's like 6 letters. It's
Yeah.
truly not that difficult. And it's not like I'm getting like people don't get like violent with me about it. They
Yeah.
just like make fun of it
Yeah.
because you can make jokes out of it.
Hmm. 8, I am encouraged to excel in every subject in school. It's a yes.
Hmm.
9, when a question about my race is asked, I am not the only one singled out to answer or speak my opinion. That's a yes.
Yes.
I will say that I remember since I don't know if I was the only one, probably maybe one of 2 Jewish people in my grade. I remember being singled out about that. This
Really?
is, yeah, just like when we were learning about anything to do with Jewish holidays or anything, I would be like asked my opinion on that and just like asked to speak about it and kind of like teach the class about it. I remember this one example where this is a teacher that I really didn't like, but she was asking how to pronounce Judaism or Judaism. That was the argument. And my family's
Mhm.
always pronounced it Judaism. And she was like, "All right, Marcus, how do you pronounce this?" And I was like, "Judaism." And then she was like, then she had this thing that she would use where it was like how to pronounce words online, and she typed it in and played it, and it said Judaism. And she's like, "All right, let's take a vote. Do we agree with the Judaism or Judaism?" And then everyone else but me voted for Judaism. And then she's like, "All right, then we'll pick that one." It was like, "Great, so
What?
you signaled me out for that," and then chose the other one.
I don't think she
But
can just decide that that's how
yeah,
the word is pronounced. I don't know which way is right, but
yeah,
I don't think she gets final
yeah.
say.
So that was odd, but
Yeah.
all right. 10, when I watch television, there are a lot of people in positive roles that look like me. Yes.
Mhm.
11, my intelligence is not questioned because of the way I speak. Yes.
Yes.
12, using public bathrooms and going up and down the stairs in public spaces are easy for me. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I lost track of my score. It's probably like 11.
I think mine is also 11.
Yeah. But those are a lot of good examples of those invisible privileges that exist for us that we wouldn't see. Like our intelligence not being questioned because of the way we speak. It's not something that we
Right.
would think about on a daily basis because we don't see the other side of it. All right. So I encourage you to look at that if you want to. It's in our episode description. And now we're going to talk about a few questions that NASP has on their website that has to do with privilege. So this question says, how do you respond when others make negative statements towards individuals of a different ethnicity, race, gender, ability level, religion, sexual orientation, and or gender identity than yourself? Do you want to speak on that first, Sophia?
Sure. I used to just be very silent about it. I'm really not a I'm not a confrontational person. I mean, aside from my family, of course, I don't like to tell people that what they're saying is wrong or what they're doing is wrong because I feel like I'm never necessarily in a position to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last few years, I have totally switched that around because as I grow up and I learn more about injustices that are done to people in specific groups, I'm in such a high place of privilege, just from my identities that I've started to just anytime I hear something, I'll at least say like, don't say that. Do you know why it's wrong to say that? You
Mm-hmm.
know, there's no need really a lot of the time is what it is. Like
Mm-hmm.
at work, because I live in it's like white suburbia is
Mm-hmm.
the best way to put it. There's not a lot of diversity here. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the people have very specific views and feelings towards minority groups. And so I have to say it a lot. Like, that's not necessary to say. It's not necessary to comment on this. So it's changed a lot. But generally, I just tell people there's no reason to say it and that there are other ways to express your distaste or disliking for somebody than attacking one of their identities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was a good point you made about how you are in a place of privilege because your identities in terms of speaking out. That's another point of privilege in that if you are white, you don't face as much risk of backlash if you stand up about things like this. So it's important for white
Mhm.
people to be kind of the ones that stand up if injustices are being done or things are being said that are wrong because we don't face as much risk of backlash as people of racial
Mhm.
ethnic minority groups. Um, but as far as my answer to that question, it's hard to say. Obviously, I would hope that I would speak out against that. It's hard in certain situations, especially because a lot of the people that say this are like people in positions of power, people that are like older, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, but most of the time, I try to make a point to respond to that and to make sure that at least that perspective is put into their mind, even if they deny it
Right.
immediately. Like at least that was heard, and that they know that there is someone that doesn't think that what they're saying is right, and maybe it'll make them think twice before saying it again.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So hopefully we all will get better and better with that as we learn more.
Right.
So, next question. How often do you go to social settings where the majority of individuals are of a different ethnicity, race, gender, ability level, religion, sexual orientation, and or gender identity than yourself? So this one, I'd say it's very rare, especially with regards to race, that I would go to a social setting where the majority of individuals are of a different race. And I'd say that's mainly because of the places that I live in being very white. And it's unfortunate. It's something I think about that is unfortunate that a lot of the people I'm exposed to are just people that look like me. And as life goes on, I'm exposed to more and more people of different identities than myself, which I'm grateful for. But I just hope to increase that in any way that I can. I am often in social situations where the majority of individuals are a different gender than me. So that's at
Mhm.
least something.
I would say the same. I mean, it also for myself because I live so far from where we go to school, I have different experiences depending where I am. So
Hmm.
like I said, I live in a very white area. It's a lot of white people here. So I'm almost never, if ever, in a setting where a majority of the people around me are of a different race or even like a lot of the things on this list, like a different ability level or
Hmm.
religion, things like that. A lot of the people around me are similar to myself or at least similar
Hmm.
to each other.
Yeah.
Um, but when I go to school, I encounter a lot of people of different races and genders and just totally different backgrounds because they're not all from the same place. And not saying that Oswego in any way is a diverse area because
Hmm.
to my knowledge, it's not.
Hmm.
But the university area definitely adds quite a bit of diversity because there are people coming from all over. But the town itself, I don't think I'm ever in a place where the individuals are a majority different from myself.
Yeah. Which is a shame, but
Yeah, absolutely.
all right. Six, we kind of touched on this. How diverse is the
Mhm.
community in which you live? Not at
Not
all.
at all.
A shame.
Ugh.
Seven, how do you feel when you're in a community that is different than your neighborhood? So, just to touch on this quickly, I do try to, as far as education goes, there's a lot of people that, when we talk to like different people in school psychology or different people that are about to be teachers, just something that's reminded me of is that there's a lot of fear about going into city schools.
Mm.
And I always try to like push back against that and say, like, there's different, like, I don't think it's that dangerous, the city schools. I think it's just a kind of an image that's placed on them that isn't necessarily true. And sure, there's different challenges that come with city schools
Mhm.
than there are in schools that we grew up in. But I try to push back against that and say that it's not really that dangerous and you should go there.
And
Um,
I think that's an interesting point also because I think that is also something that depends on your geographical position because I had never heard that until I went
mm,
upstate. I had never heard that city schools were like at least so bad as people make it out to be. When I talk to education majors and people, who are going into the Syracuse city schools
mhm,
for any sort of placement or they're considering teaching there or something, they're always so scared and they're
mhm.
always so afraid of what the kids might do to them and what the other professionals in the building might be like. And I think it's really strange because I had never ever heard that.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, there's some truth to that as you hear like some scary stories from the city schools, but I don't think that I mean that could come with kids having more reactions to chronic stress and things like that occur in the
Right,
cities. But I really try to push back against that in that I mean, they just need our help.
right,
And
right.
um, an example that I often use, even though it's depressing, is that I think that when you think about school shootings, which are like one of the most pressing issues of safety that we think about, even though they're quite rare when you look at the bigger picture,
Hmm.
um, those usually happen in, as far as I know, in more white suburban districts.
Yeah,
Um,
rural and
be,
suburban schools.
yeah, because the people that become school shooters are often white and male, and they go back to
Hmm.
the schools that they came from.
Hmm.
So that's often something that I bring up if they say that they want to go into those schools as opposed to city schools. Doesn't help; it just increases the anxiety. But still,
Right. That's in my own mind when I was thinking about districts that I would pick, at least for our first our first practicum site, I was avoiding the outlier schools, the rural schools and the ones that are kind of on the outside. I would have rather been closer to the city.
hmm, that's interesting. Yeah, because obviously the majority of people that we know, I think, would prefer not going into the city schools.
Right. Right.
All right. How would you make your neighborhood more inclusive and sensitive?
That's a tough one because that really
Hmm.
depends. It'll change depending on who the people are that you live around.
Yeah. One example I'll talk about is with my home school district. Um, this happened after I graduated, but there was a big controversy there that was all over the news about a student who talked in a school newspaper about how their most significant challenge growing up in school is when they were coming out, and the superintendent and principal censored them and took that out of the newspaper and said they couldn't talk about their sexuality in the newspaper.
Wow.
And so the student fought back against that, and it was a big news story, and there was a lot of changes that occurred because of that, and a lot of people started speaking out in the school about how the school district didn't support them over the years and the challenges that they faced in my school district. And so the superintendent ended up stepping down, and a lot of changes happened because of that. But you kind of have to look around at the things that you don't know exist, because I didn't know that any of that stuff was happening when I was in school.
Right.
I don't see them on a daily basis unless I knew those individuals personally. And you kind of have to take a deeper look at that and try to preemptively create things that are more equitable, create systems that are more equitable, and try to speak out and make sure that there's no inequalities going on. But it's hard to know what all the issues are before they come out in a situation like that.
Right. I think if we were to look at my hometown, there's a lot that can be done to make it more sensitive and inclusive. But I think one of the things that I believe my home district is still going through is a change in our mascot and our sports teams and the names, because we were the Warriors, and so it was something that never made sense to me, because it is a person instead of what's usually like an animal or something like that. Our mascot is just a Native American head. And a lot of Long Island was built up by indigenous people, and there were a lot of indigenous communities here before it was taken over by white people. So a lot of people are getting really, really upset because they think that it's like, because it's a push in New York. I think Governor Hochul is trying to kind of wrap that up and get it out of there, because it's really not. That's just not how you do a mascot. Pick anything else. And I remember voting in second or third grade for a different mascot, and it still never happened. And here we are, almost 20 years later, and it's still not happening. But there's just so much uproar right now because people don't understand. They're like, oh, we're taking away from, like they're trying to play like they care about indigenous people and Native Americans and the culture that comes from here. And they get really upset and bent out of shape. But I don't think any of them realize that it's not a fair idea. And, I think any sort of education in that specific area would help to make my own neighborhood a lot more inclusive. But there's just so many things. That's just the big one that I think is happening right now. I'm only here like a third of the year, so I don't really know.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because it's happening all over New York. And it's just shocking to me. I didn't know how many schools had Native American heads as their mascots. I don't know why that's so popular. It's absurd. I
want to say there's at least 3 or 4 that I know of on the island that have it. Yeah. And it's like, why? What was ever the thought process behind that?
Yeah. And there's so many school districts appealing to the state because there's this new mandate to get rid of them. I can't remember when, maybe by the end of the year.
I think so.
Yeah. But it's crazy how defensive they are of their mascot. I don't understand.
Very strange.
Yeah, and that's an important point you brought up about just education, which may be a way to make our neighborhoods more inclusive, is just speaking up about these issues and making sure that more people are aware of some of the injustices that occur, and just on an individual basis spread more of that education, and that could make it more inclusive and sensitive. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Wiscard of Oz Adventures in School Psychology. We had a great conversation with Dr. Story, and we had a good conversation here. So I am looking forward to the future of the podcast, and I will see you in the next episode.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.